friends, I am Stephanie Kirk here with you today looking at yet another 5-level cram. Today we're going to be talking about argument, and we're going to have a little bit of practice kind of building those arguments and breaking them down. Over in the chat, say hi. Okay, as we get started, I wanted to just kind of make sure that you remember that this stream is being recorded and it might appear on some of our public channels. So if you put your question or something like that, I might say your name. So if you're not okay with that, maybe take your name away or just kind of wanted to give you that heads up. Of course, I am Stephanie Kirk. You can reach out to anyone at Think 5able. Then, of course, you can find me. I am Kirk's Corner. You can reach out to me on Discord. And then, of course, send me a direct email, stephanie@5able.me. Some things that we have coming soon for you. Of course, you'll have your Cram resources. Hope you got those little QR codes. I think there's one that you'll find pretty handy for today. And then we're going to be looking at the reasoning and organization trivia coming up. You've got argument and synthesis evidence and commentary, specifically looking at how to build those pieces together, coming up on the 2nd of April. And then moving into the 3rd, you have your trivia on style. So you guys enjoying your trivia so far? So tonight we're learning about argumentative structures. And the reason that we're going to do this is so that we can build effective arguments that include complex elements of argumentation. So I have a quick poll for you tonight. Today's stream will help on which FRQ? What we're going to be looking at today is we're going to try to disassemble an argument in a given text. We want to make sure that we can create those arguments that include the Toulmin model and that we can explain the role of these structures in each FRQ. So what do you think tonight's stream is going to help us in what? Are you ready? It is going to help us in all of them. And so one of the things that we're going to do tonight after we look at building these arguments and kind of putting some pieces together, and then a little quick check that we're going to look at what is the way in which an argument is factored into each FRQ so we can make sure that we're figuring out all of those pieces put together. So what I'd like for you to do, just like every time, take just a moment and make a goal for yourself from tonight's stream. What do you think you are going to be able to do by the end of this? Of course, throughout the entire stream, if you have any questions at all, feel free to put them in chat, and Brandon and I will answer those questions and make sure that we've reached out to you. If you have a question later on, right after this, you got the Discord chat with Brandon, and I'll check in on that too for a little bit. And then we'll be on Discord, and of course, you can reach out to us in any of those ways. So we are here to make sure that you are prepared to build those arguments on all 3 FRQs. So we're going to look at a couple of quick reminders. I am going to go kind of fast through that, but if you look at your crams, those replays, they will tell you what's in each of those crams, and you can look at those slides as well to get a little bit more information. We're going to look at finding the argument first. I got a couple of different examples, and I have a little tool that can be used to kind of help you figure out what the argument is that's being made. One thing that I noticed in some of our feedback from last week's stream, I noticed that it said, I have trouble finding the argument when I'm not sure what the passage is asking. And that can be a real challenge. So we're going to kind of look at how can we put those pieces together with this little trick that I got for you. And we're going to talk about building the argument, and then we're going to look at the role of argument in the FRQs. You do have a couple of resources here for you. I've got a planning guide that we put together. This is actually something that I've been using in my classroom for a while. I have tweaked it just based on the new rubric to kind of make sure it's good. So hopefully you'll find that very helpful. Of course, you've got the Discord down there as well, and most of our streams, our 1-hour streams, are focusing on the 2019 FRQs. Today, we're actually going to look at one that's not from 2019, but just in case, I want to make sure you had those there. So quick reminders for today. First of all, we talked about your toolbox, and I want to make sure that you guys remember what those things in your toolbox are. So you have the rhetorical situation. You have classical structure. You can break down that text and you can build your response using that structure. You can look at it by chunks, strategies, or devices. And then when you're planning your response, you can plan it by chunk, by strategy, or by device. And then of course you've got that Toulmin outline to help you put those paragraphs together. So think of the classical structure as a really big Toulmin example, and then those paragraphs are used building that as well. And then of course we also talked about those modes of development or the methods of developments. Sometimes people think of those as text structure. But all of those pieces come together to really kind of help make sure that you know where you're going. Now we did focus on line of reasoning as well. I didn't necessarily put that on here because I think line of reasoning happens when you employ each of these elements in your toolbox. So how do we want to structure the essay? Well, you want to start with classical structure because that's going to be the piece that puts that whole thing together. Next, you're going to move into that IDA strategy and that TOBI. So Ida and Toby are here to help you. Now, as you move forward with us, we're going to go over these in detail, but basically you may remember that is to identify, decide, and analyze what you're going to do. And then Toby is your writing plan. It's your thesis, your outline, and that big idea that's going to kind of link that significance. So you've got to ask yourself, what is the most logical thing I can do for the arrangement of my ideas? Then you move into those paragraphs, and with those paragraphs, you're going to be looking at the evidence and the commentary. So the way that you're building your argument is building the evidence and the commentary and essentially your analysis as well so that you can get that area. So your question here becomes, how can I plan for Toulmin's model, and how are those modes going to help me when I'm looking to write what my argument's going to be, regardless of if my topic is something I care about or know about. So it'll help you to get ready in the long run. Then of course you want to make sure you've got that concluding segment. Now it might not be a full conclusion paragraph, and that's okay, but you definitely want to have that concluding segment at the end, and then of course a concluding segment at the end of each paragraph to kind of put those pieces together. So we looked at the classical structure and we compared this to a couple of different models that you all used in your class. Again, if you want to look back at those, you can go back to our replays and you can see those specific elements of the classical structure. And we also talked about the Rogerian structure as well, and you can look at those. Basically, it amounts to you have an introduction, you have a body, and you have a conclusion. That body is where you're going to put your position and your proof, including addressing the opposition. So then we talked about how you can visualize it, because the overall outline has claims and evidence, but each individual paragraph explodes into its own Toulmin model with its own claims. That template, what do those paragraphs have in them? And this is tremendously important because this is where you are building your argument. This is where the bulk of your points are going to come from, and quite frankly, this is the realest skill that you're going to need in your back pocket. So when you are looking at this, your teacher has maybe not used the name Toulmin with it, but I'm sure you've talked about your claim. So your claim is the assertion. Remember, your claim is going to come in a couple of different forms. Your primary claim is going to be your thesis statement, what you're trying to prove. Your subclaims are going to be the topic sentences of those body paragraphs, okay? So overall, your claim is that thesis statement is the assertion, and then the evidence is the reasons. Why do you think this? Those pieces of evidence become the topic sentences, and those topic sentences are your subclaims for your body paragraphs. Does anyone remember in the chat, can you tell me at minimum how many body paragraphs should you have for your argument? How many body paragraphs should you have regardless of FRQ 1, 2, or 3? As a minimum, what should you have? You absolutely nailed it. 2 as a minimum. Now you can definitely bring in that third one, time depending, but I would definitely plan according to your watch. Make sure you have a watch that's test appropriate to kind of work for you, okay? All right, so the next piece is going to be those qualifiers, the limitations. Is it always this way? And then look at that counter, the opposition. What about, and then kind of tell us. Now we talked in some of our previous streams about the difference between concession and refutation and which one helps your argument and which one hinders your argument. So you definitely want to make sure that you're addressing the opposition where possible, but it's a good move to concede and refute together, okay? To say, yes, this is true, but here's the reason why that doesn't really impact us for this particular claim, okay? All right, so we talked about Toulmin. So quick question, and I know this was a super fast thing tonight, but I'm just curious, which tool in your toolbox are you the most comfortable with so far? Which tool are you most comfortable with so far? Is it the classical structure, that overall structure? Is it the Toulmin that you're using to build those little paragraphs? Is it planning for your line of reasoning? Or is it your method of development, making sure that you can include those? All right, are you ready? That classical structure. It makes perfect sense because you've been using that for so long, but hopefully we're going to build in these other pieces. Now, one thing that I noticed here that's most interesting is the methods of development is something that nobody indicated that they felt comfort with that. So if you would, make sure that you download that planning guide that's in that that's in that QR code, because that planning guide actually takes you through the methods of development, like what development can you use to prove this point right here, okay? And I will definitely talk to Kevin and let him know, and we'll focus a little bit more on those methods of development in our streams, and we can put some resources in the Discord too, okay? Excellent. All right, so let's look at finding the argument, shall we? Now, this little trick is actually something that I learned from a student who, we were in class and we were looking at a text and the student was struggling. And then another student said, here's what I have come up with, okay? So I want you to take just a moment and think about this paragraph. Now, I'm kind of a nerd and I love the way that this is written. But this is Stephen Prothero. It's a book called Intro to the American Bible, so you may be using it in your, if you're in APUSH, or if your AP Lang course is connected to American Lit. So, words matter. They move individuals to tears and to action. They make or break communities. In Israel and the Palestinian territories, India and Pakistan, Great Britain and the United States, words tie people together and tear them apart. Socrates lives because of Aristotle's dialogues, and the world remembers Jesus because of the words of Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. And what Americans recall of Paul Revere, we owe to the poetry of Henry Wadsworth Longfellow. I want you to think just for a moment, and in the chat, I want you to tell me what's the claim that's being made here. Now, I understand that the first two words here are words matter, and your brain might go right to words matter. But try to think about what that claim might be, overall, big picture, and what is the evidence that's used to prove that claim. Think about it for just a second and type your answer in the chat for me. Okay, so I've got words extract human emotion. I love the way you worded that. And then it provides examples of when the words were powerful and when the words were the things that we remembered. That words have significant effect on the world and play a large part in history. I love that. You guys took it to that next level. So just to kind of help you figure it out, this is one of the structures that I actually learned from a student. And she had this little kind of chanty type thing. She would be writing and she'd be like, ERC unless WBQ, ERC unless WBQ, which was kind of an interesting way for all of us to remember it. And so when she was breaking down the argument in a complex text, something that she said, I don't know what he's talking about here, but I can do this pattern. So this pattern can help you to figure it out. So basically what this is your evidence or reasoning comes to the claim, and then you've got your sense, which is your warrant or your background, or sense would be your reasoning behind that, and then unless there's a qualifier to make it different. Now, this sounds really weird, but if you put it into like a fill in the blank format, you can almost always break down the argument. Because blank, comma, blank, that's your claim. Since blank, that's going to be the warrant and the backing. That's the reasoning behind it. So if you just try to think about it in those layers. Now, some students will flip it the other way and they'll say claim because blah, 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 since blah, blah, blah. Now, that sounds really strange, but let's look at it in practice. So we might look at this and we might say something like, words have the power to affect people and society because we remember written word more than the action itself, okay? So you can pull those layers together and see what it is. Well, what would be the next piece? So if you've got your ERC, your evidence and reasoning, and then that claim. Remembering the claim is words have the power to affect people and society. Why does that matter? Well, because we remember words more than the actions in those examples that were given, right? So the next piece becomes, what's that reasoning behind it? Well, in this particular paragraph, we have a lot of different types, a lot of pieces there. We have the historical places of war based on differing ideas. We've talked about Socrates because of Aristotle. It gives us the example from the Bible. And then it talks about Paul Revere in the poem. So you've got a lot of little layers that can help you out when you bring it down to that ERC with your WB. Okay? So let's look at another example here when we're bringing it down. Have you guys seen this one? The Queen at Tilbury? Okay, so I'm going to give you just a minute here to think about and read through this particular text. It's pretty short, I know, but I just want you to see if you can figure out what is she saying, okay? So take just a minute on that one. Okay, are you ready with me? Did you look at this one and think, okay, well, that's an older text, maybe not one of my favorite things I've ever read? Now, when you looked at it, you probably thought about the opening aspect of it. Now, I'm going to model this for you, looking at just the first part, okay? My loving people, we have been persuaded by some that are careful of our safety to take heed how we commit ourselves to armed multitudes for fear of treachery. But I assure you, I do not desire to live to distrust my faithful and loving people. Let tyrants fear. I have always so behaved myself that, under God, I have placed my chiefest strength and safeguard in the loyal hearts and good will of my subjects, and therefore I am come amongst you as you see it at this time, not for my recreation and disport, but being resolved in the midst of the heat of battle to live or die amongst you all, to lay down for my God and for my kingdom and my people, my honor and my blood, even in the dust. Next sentence there, notice this one. I know I have the body, but of a weak and feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king, and of a king of England too, and think foul scorn that Parma or Spain or any prince of Europe should dare to invade the borders of my realm, to which rather than dishonor shall grow by me, I will take up arms. I myself will be your general, judge, and rewarder of every one of your virtues in the field. Now that's enough to let us kind of go, because already you're like, okay, she is now saying, hey, I'm here with you, right? So when you think about what that claim becomes and together, you're able to put it there. Okay, if it does glitch out on you for just a second, please push pause and then unpause it, and it should catch right back up. But I promise you I'm here. Okay, so what you're looking at is those two pieces together, that Queen Elizabeth is hoping to build the confidence and energize the troops as they're moving forward into the battle. So if that's kind of what she's doing, well, how does she do that? What is the evidence or the reasoning? What is the stuff that she's using to prove that? Well, she says, hey, I am here and I am ready to die if needed. I'm going to support you in this noble cause, and I am right here with you. Okay? So the question becomes, what would be the evidence and reasoning that supports that claim? So she says she's addressing concerns and fears because she's hoping to allay those fears, and she wants them to feel more positive about what's a pretty negative situation. She also goes on to say great rewards will come to those who have the courage to stand here with me and fight us through this invasion. And remember, that was that last piece. She said, I am your rewarder, right? So we can start to see how all of these pieces come together and really break that argument down so that even when we're not 100% sure what's happening, we can identify that claim. Now the question becomes, what if I can identify a couple of different claims? Well, that's where the layers of argument come in. You're going to go back to the skills that you've been doing forever. You're going to think about those big ideas. I think back in the day, you probably called it a main idea. You're going to put those main ideas together and you're going to identify the primary claim from that. Okay? So that's a super cool little trick that can really help you out as you're looking to put those pieces together. So the next piece is about building an argument. And when I'm looking at building an argument and trying to put those pieces together, sometimes I'll have students say, I'm just not sure where to put it all. Like, I understand the classical structure. I understand introduction, body, conclusion. But then I've got all of these passages where I'm supposed to pull evidence from these 6 or 7 passages. Or I have this passage that I'm supposed to read and determine what makes it effective. And then I've got to figure out how to put those pieces together. Or, heaven forbid, with the argument, you've got nothing. That all has to come from your brain. Where does that come from? So we want to look at those pieces together. Now, I did mention that for today, we're going to go a little bit astray. We've talked about those 2019 prompts, and I felt like having talked about those and using examples of those in the past, it would kind of impact your ability to think on your feet. So I decided that we're going to go with this 2015 prompt about polite speech. Now, if you have practiced with your teacher, you might have seen the polite speech. It makes me think of the artifice prompt as well, which was interesting because a lot of the students that used it were like, I don't know what artifice is, so I can't figure that out. But I want you to think just for a moment. An anthropologist studying first-year students at a university in the United States writes that friendly phrases like, how are you? Nice to meet you. Let's get in touch. Communicate politeness rather than literal intent. What, if anything, is the value or function of such polite speech? In a well-written essay, develop your position on the value or function of polite speech in a culture or community with which you are familiar. Use appropriate evidence from your reading, experience, or observation to support your argument. So I want you to think just about that. the first step when you're looking at it needs to be just kind of what's in your brain. How do you think or feel about polite speech? Do you think it's positive, negative, or neutral? What do you think? Tell me in the chat. Okay, so when we look at a prompt like this and we're trying to figure out how do we feel, sometimes we really just don't care, right? Like, I mean, sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. Kind of depends on where I'm at, who I'm with, what kind of mood I'm in that day, whether or not the person I'm speaking to is in a mood, right? Like, you kind of got to think about it. So in order to build your argument, you got to have some evidence. Sometimes you have a clear claim and you got that evidence there. And sometimes you got a lot of evidence and you're not really sure what your claim is going to be. So just like Connor said, sometimes it might be easier to say that it's a positive thing because maybe you can come up with a ton of reasons for it, the positive aspect of polite speech, but you can't come up with anything that says negative. Okay, so you can think about that as well and build your argument accordingly. Now, let's be clear here. If in your heart you're like, I shouldn't have to waste my time polite speech in the cashier when I really just need to get out of the store and get to everything else that I got going on in my life, right? So maybe that's how you feel. But all you can come up with for examples to write about says that polite speech is a good thing and you should do it. That's okay. I mean, when I'm reading your essay, I'm not going to know that what you wrote is different from what's in your head and what's in your heart. Go with what you've got the best evidence for, okay? It's like the dreaded school uniform essay. I think school uniforms, I mean, I thought it was cool when I was a teacher because I never had to think about what to wear. It was always done for me. But like as a student, I can think of 1,000,005 reasons not to wear the uniform. But when I sit down to write the essay, all I have are all these things that have been drilled into me for all these years for why we need to actually do this uniform, okay? So you want to go with what you've got the best evidence for, and that's something to think about. With this prompt, we've got two things we want to make sure that we do. Notice the question that says, what, if anything, is the value or function of polite speech? So the first thing I need to do is I need to develop a position on the value or the function. So I need to say what that is. But I also have to explain that in terms of a culture or community with which I'm familiar. Okay? So that's where I'm going with this particular prompt. So I thought that for this, we can kind of look at how to build it. And I'm really big on visuals. This is a strategy that you can kind of use is kind of think about putting these pieces together, okay? So a moment ago in the chat, there was a question about how do you use the Toulmin model. So I want you to think about this whole thing. The whole thing is one Toulmin structure because you've got a primary claim, you've got to have evidence, and you've got to have your backing and your counters, right? But within that level, notice evidence one, and in the line of reasoning of the paragraph itself, this evidence actually becomes the claim for that body paragraph. And that body paragraph needs the evidence, which would be this, and then you've got to build in that commentary and analysis that helps it to make sense, to put those pieces together. It's like the connective tissue, if you will, of your argument that you're kind of building, okay? So now we've got a position on polite speech, and we're going to look at a student sample, an actual student sample here, and kind of talk about what it looks like when we are building that out together. So I wanted to make sure that you could follow the line of reasoning because the line of reasoning is kind of what we talked about. And I'm going to build in a little bit of discussion about the methods of development, which I did not put intentionally into tonight's slide deck. But since that was something that you guys indicated on your poll that you didn't really have much confidence there, I want to kind of address that too. So while polite speech can be confusing to some people, it is incredibly valuable because it serves as a way to show respect and can give the user a leg up in the world. So you've got two layers here in that primary claim. You've got that concept of that it's valuable because it shows respect and that it helps to give the user a leg up in society. Okay, That's great. So within there, we've got the first piece that we have here is polite speech is harnessed so that we can show respect to people in a higher position than us, like elders or teachers. Now, we've talked about evaluating your own rhetorical aspects. This is a good example because who's going to be reading this, right? AP readers. Those AP readers are going to A, be your elders, and B, be your teachers. Right? You got to placate them a little bit, right? So this is a really good, strong example. So I want you to think about what would be the evidence that creates this body paragraph. Think about that for me and put in the chat what might be one piece of evidence, and you don't have to give like, full sentences, but just kind of think in general, what would you use or could you use to prove that it shows respect to people in a higher position? So you might give a personal anecdote and say, kind of, here's where it is. Great idea. Polite speech in job interviews. Of course, you definitely want to seem very, very respectful there. That could even help you get the job, right? If you're doing something in sales, then you might need that polite speech to kind of open the door to get that conversation going for whatever it is that you're trying. So I had a question. So could what you have in the evidence box be a subclaim in a sense? Angela, darling, you have exactly nailed it. You are 100% on point, and I'm going to show you that here in just a minute. Okay, so addressing them and how one deals with the opposition shows a sign of intelligence, respect, and can overall strengthen a relationship. Absolutely. Okay, so you can totally do that. All right, so if that's going to be the first piece of evidence, here's the second piece of evidence. In our society, we're always searching for more opportunities to help us succeed in. Now, I want you to think for just a moment, how are these two ideas connected? When we're looking at the line of reasoning, we've got to figure out what are these two things and how do they connect? Do they connect clearly? With regards to the line of reasoning, you probably noticed that these two pieces of evidence follow the exact same structure that's up there in the primary claim or in the thesis statement, right? Show respect and give the user a leg up. So it follows those two pieces. That would help you if I took this essay and cut the paragraphs out and said, okay, put these paragraphs in order. You would use your thesis statement to help you figure out what order those paragraphs go in, right? Of course you would. Okay, so the next question then becomes, what do we do here? Where do we go? And how can those methods of development help? So the first thing that I would say is for my first method of development, I would define what polite speech is. That'd be where I'd go. And I would do that in my introduction paragraph. And then when I talk about it being valuable because it helps to show respect and gives the user a leg up in the world, I probably need to give some kind of a description of maybe an example of polite speech that does each of those things, right? So that would help as well. So you would be giving exemplification and you would be describing that situation in detail. So you can pull in those methods of development as you build out that evidence. So here we have a paragraph. And I'm kind of, rather than I don't want to read the whole thing at you, but I do want to kind of look at what these pieces are in each part of this specific argument that's being made here, okay? So, a question that popped up that I want to make sure I address before I start talking about this paragraph is, where would the methods of development be? Is it in the introduction? Is it in the body? It's everywhere, Okay, you get to decide because it's based on the purpose that you are trying to achieve. Now, I will be very honest with you. I have noticed that after the first few years of teaching this course, I fall back on, I fall back 100% on definition, because if I can define it, then I can make sure that my audience is in the same place that I am, where I want them to be. Okay, there's a difference. For example, when I wrote this one, I looked at it as there's a difference between polite speech when the cashier is ringing up my groceries and polite speech when I am trying to, when I'm just walking down the hallway, right? Like, you can kind of see those different pieces there. And so what you see is that definition happens naturally for me. I usually will look at my structure and see, what am I doing? For this particular type of prompt, I have to discuss the value of it. So I would go through narration, I would go through exemplification, I would go through description, and then I would just describe those different pieces and put them in there. However, on the other hand, if it was one of those like discuss the factors, I might use compare and contrast for that. I might use process, the one like the windmill one, I might use process analysis on that one. Like, the first thing you need to consider is this, the second one is this and this. Okay, so that's kind of where I fall back. But really, I mean, Brandon says he uses those too as well, but you got to figure out what you know. I've gotten to the point to where now when I sit down to write, in my brain, I don't think, okay, what can I define in this one so that I can make sure we're all on the same page? It just happens, okay? So hopefully that helps. All right, so we're gonna look at this student model and we're gonna see the way in which the argument is built. Now, with this particular example, I wanted to kind of highlight that, as you noticed, it's pulled in exactly as the student presented it, so it's all there for us, but we did have some reader feedback on this one, and I shared in the Discord earlier today, someone asked where they could find those student samples and that sort of thing. So those pieces are all there for you. All right, so the first thing I want you to do is to just kind of think in a body paragraph, because that's what this is. In a body paragraph, where should your claim go? Can you put that in the chat? Where should your claim go in a body paragraph? Okay. Great question, Connor. Connor asked, can we use first person? I'm going to show you that here. Now, the claim is typically going to be like that first sentence, maybe the second sentence. If you're trying to use some context to kind of lure them down to your point, it's your choice, really, but you do want it right there at the beginning. And the reason is because when you're looking at the line of reasoning, you want to say, hey, here's what you should believe, and then here's why. Now, it's totally true. If you look at the rubrics, it says that the thesis can be anywhere in the essay, and that's straight up 100%, because sometimes you want to present your reasons and then give your claim at the end. But really, the stronger piece that you're looking for, and what I 100% recommend that is done on every AP exam, make sure that you put that claim right there at your topic sentence, okay? So make sure it's there. And then that final sentence needs to come back to your primary claim, which is your thesis statement. So the body paragraph should link back to those individual pieces, okay? All right, so in this particular example, it is the second body paragraph. You probably noticed based on the first sentence being pulled through on that example. Now, remember, when we're trying to figure out what that claim is, we've got ERC WB, okay? So evidence and reasoning guide you to the claims. And then the sense, when you fill in the blank, sense, WB, is the reasoning. It's the warrant and the backing. It's the reason that those things connect between the claim and the evidence and reasoning, okay? So, in this particular one, what we see here is, in our society, we are always searching for more opportunities to help us succeed in life. Polite speech opens up some of these avenues. It is almost certain that if you show respect, you will at some point in time be given extra help. So what you see here is that this becomes the subclaim. Now you can notice this is a lengthy paragraph, so it obviously has all of those other pieces. So this particular subclaim, what we're going to see is it becomes its own Toulmin model. Now, the question was, can I use first person? Absolutely can. Look right here. I have experienced this. Due to my use of polite speech and a respectful tone, I was able to mentor with a college professor. In my mentorship, I unlocked extra help that has significantly given me a leg up, as I was able to sit in a few college classes and observe graduate student meetings. In this case, what you see is we've got this evidence that's being presented. It's a personal anecdote. So with that personal anecdote, we can absolutely use the I, me, or my aspect in it, okay? But not only does it say, in my experience, I have experienced this. If it just says, I have experienced this, you haven't really given us a great bit of evidence. Okay, you experienced it. Cool beans. But you got to bring in that extra piece. So it says, due to my use of polite speech and respectful tone, I got this. I got the ability to mentor with a college professor. But wait, there's more. It doesn't just say that. It brings in the next level, and it says, why does that matter? Well, it matters because it gave me a leg up in moving forward, okay? And it kind of brings that piece in. And it tells us the why again. I was able to sit in these college classes. I was able to observe graduate level student meetings. So you can see those pieces brought together right here. In our stream last week, someone said that their teacher told them that when they're writing the body paragraph, they need to think like a 3-year-old. But why? Why? This is a strong example here. I have experienced this. Why? Well, my use of polite speech and respectful tone set me up with a mentor with a college professor. Why is it? So what? Why? Well, I got extra help. Why? Well, I got it because I was able to sit in on college classes and sit in on those meetings. So it goes through those, all of those questions are answered for us, and it gives us that extended one. The next piece is, I want to kind of highlight as well, that it goes to that thesis statement. Remember, the thesis mentioned that it gives the user a leg up. So not only have we talked about that respect aspect and opening up those avenues, it's clearly connecting back to that concept of me using polite speech benefits me in the end, okay? So we also see that it goes another step further in that commentary, transitioning into the second piece and kind of seeing that other element connecting to the other subclaim. But what we look at here is that we're able to see this transition and that commentary and analysis. Okay, so why does it matter that you got to do these things? How did it give you that leg up? So then it says, this is an opportunity that, had I not expressed my gratification through polite speech, I do not think I would have had. So by adding that sentence, what we see here in this built argument is, if not for this, this would not be here. Okay, so it's giving a clear description of what has happened and moving in to analyze how those pieces are connected. And then it moves in and it clearly transitions. And obviously, there's this idea that through using polite speech, the person who wrote this has benefited in some kind of way. So then it says the other side of polite speech shown in this experience is that it can have unexpected functions that cause a ripple effect. Now, it's interesting the way that that's worded, because it kind of sounds like it's going to have a little bit of a negative aspect. Like, it kind of sounds like they're going to talk about opposition there, right? But it moves into politicians use and sometimes abuse this ripple effect every day. Now, notice the way that it kind of has addressed the complexities here. It's addressed the other side of the issue, but it didn't do it in a way that lessened its argument. It basically says, hey, people do this and it benefits them, and now we move on. Okay, so by connecting with citizens and using polite speech and similar language patterns, they're able to receive more votes. The politicians are not just using polite speech to show respect, but they're hoping to take advantage of some of the ripple effects it causes. So you can see that it gives those critical attributes. It gives us that the evidence that supports the claim. This is an example of a politician who is searching for opportunities to succeed in life. And how are they doing it? They are doing it by applying that polite speech and the similar language patterns so they can see those pieces. Okay? So we see these little pieces put together into this paragraph, but this paragraph actually plays a bigger part in the argument as a whole, in the essay as a whole. So then it moves into this last sentence down here. While it may seem manipulative, so there's a little bit of like a concession here, it might seem like manipulation. It is the way polite speech functions in their community, just like how polite speech functions in our communities. This connects back clearly to that prompt. Remember, the goal was to look at how polite speech functions in society. So you're able to see all of those little pieces and put them back together. So, in terms of visualizing the argument, what does it look like to visualize the argument? And here's where it's at. While polite speech can be confusing to some people, it is incredibly valuable because it serves as a way to show respect and can give the user a leg up in the world. When we look over at the body paragraph that we analyzed, you're able to see kind of the way in which the argument is built. So with this first part, the primary claim and these pieces of evidence, that is the Toulmin model for the essay as a whole. The evidence then, the body paragraph, the blue would become its own Toulmin model, and the green becomes its own Toulmin model for the paragraphs. But these paragraphs build into the bigger picture as a whole, and that is how line of reasoning helps you get through those ideas. So you can see how each piece clearly connects to where it's going. Would you agree? Excellent. Okay, so the next thing that we wanted to look at and talk about today is how argument works in the FRQs specifically. So remember at the beginning I asked, what FRQ do you think we're focusing on today? And we are talking about argument, but your textbook probably says everything is an argument, or maybe that's the title of the textbook that your course uses. So how do we include argument in each of these FRQs? So the first one that we have, and I'm going to go just in the order of what's on the test because I think that's the best way to do it. The first one is synthesis. When you are building an argument in synthesis, your support should be rational and logical, and it should be based on the evidence provided for you. So you need to make sure that your argument, when you build your argument, you need to build your claim. And within your claim, you should have evidence. So where does the evidence come from? Well, for the synthesis essay, the evidence is going to come from those sources that they give you. Now, you are required to use a minimum of 3 sources. I always say to try to use 4 because you can at the very least use one of those visuals in passing, right? And that's a really easy way to get that 4th source in there. So you want to make sure that you're bringing that in. When you are looking at it, I want you to consider it a conversation, okay? It's like a dinner table. I always think of the synthesis essay as the dinner table. And when you sit down to eat with your family at a holiday, or maybe you do it every single night, whenever you sit down at the table, everybody at the table is talking. Everybody at the table plays a role in what that conversation looks like. That's why that's so hard to write in literature. And so if you think of your synthesis as a conversation, your goal is to show the complexities and tensions, but to show the way that those sources play with each other, okay? And then of course, you want to make sure that you're addressing the opposition as well. You can look at it and you can address the opposition within each paragraph, or you can present your evidence and then have a paragraph in and of itself that addresses the opposition as well. It is completely and totally your choice, but this is how you build the argument into FRQ1. So What about FRQ2, that rhetorical analysis thing? Well, argument actually takes place on two levels there. The first level is you can use that ERC WB to break down the claim that you've been given. So for example, if you go back in the last couple of like rhetorical analysis with Kevin, for example, you guys were using the Gandhi prompt. When we looked at the evidence and commentary for that Gandhi prompt, we used it as well. You can go back and look at that letter that Gandhi wrote, and with each paragraph think, okay, ERC WB. And it'll help you to understand a little bit more of what that looks like and where those strategies kind of come from. So the rhetorical analysis still requires the implementation of argumentation as well, because when you are writing, you are still writing an argument. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. So you need to analyze, so you got to break down the given text, but you've got to build your argument. So you are using your argument about that argument in the text, okay? So it's layered together. The claim is yours, the evidence is what's in the text. The evidence in that text becomes your evidence for your claim as you move forward in rhetorical analysis. The third one, of course, is argument. And that argument FRQ is the one that is most obvious when I say, how do you address argument in an argument? Because that's what you are doing. You are proving a point. So with this, I want you to think about your support being rational and logical, not emotional. Make sure that it's objective. And we've given you guys a couple of different acronyms. You guys gave me some in the last stream as well. But REHUGO is one that we kind of connect with just because it's been used for a long time. A lot of teachers are using it in the forums and that sort of thing. And so your evidence, instead of coming from sources that give you, your evidence would come from REHUGO. And just like that student sample that we looked at a few minutes ago, you absolutely 100% can use first person as you're moving forward in presenting your argument. Now, you want to make sure though, just like with the synthesis that you pull from different sources, it would be a really good idea to pull from different sources here. And those sources are the elements of REHUGO. So maybe you have an example from something that you read. Now, I would encourage you to think about that reading because your goal here is argumentation. If you are going to use fiction for that example for reading, you want to try to figure that out and make sure that you somehow in there and say, wow, this is a piece of fiction. It is no less believable for the real life experience of the everyday teen or something like that. You're moving into looking at culture, science, ethics, pull in a couple of different ones. I usually tell my students at least 3. And the reason I do that is because you've got to have those 2 claims that support your primary claim. And within those primary claims, you've got to have the additional pieces. So I realize that might sound a little bit confusing, but if we go back to the argument slide where you were looking at those pieces right here, think about it like this. You've got your primary claim, but if you're using REHUGO, you can use one element here, and then you've got those 2 pieces that go here, okay? And then use a different element here for those 2 pieces here. So that way you can kind of see what those pieces look like when you put it together. So our goal for tonight was that you would be able to learn those structures so that you can build effective arguments with complex elements for all of the FRQs. We talked about how to use this to disassemble the argument in a given text with that cute little trick, the ERC WB, which has a weird little chanty kind of sound to it. We talked about creating arguments that include the critical attributes of Toulmin's model. So you have your claim and you have your evidence and you have the warrant and backing. But we also talked about how that blows up, not just in terms of classical structure, but in terms of paragraph level argumentation. And then we looked at the role of argumentative structure in each FRQ so that no matter where you are in class, no matter what FRQ you're working on, you can pull in those pieces of argument. If you are still feeling a little bit like you might need some more support, double check that you have pulled over that planning guide because it's going to give you some structures to kind of help you out looking at how can you build the argument and intentionally focus on the line of reasoning. It will remind you, if you use that, it will remind you to focus on the methods of developments, whether you're using the sources for synthesis or REHUGO in the argument as well. So that said, guys, I am Stephanie Kirk. You can reach out to me at any point, at any time. And then we're going to look at a couple of things coming up. You've got your Cram resources, you've got trivia tomorrow, as a matter of fact, and then you've got Argument and Synthesis Evidence and Commentary. So that's kind of this next piece. How do you build that commentary and analysis that nails it, right? And then of course on the 3rd, you're looking at yet another trivia. So lots of fun things coming up for you. And as Brandon just said, let's keep this conversation going in the Discord. Jump on over there if you have any questions for us. Brandon will be there for you, and then we'll of course be there at any other point if you need us as well. I do have one final poll for you tonight. I always want you guys to create a goal for yourself based on that learning intention. So my question is, did this stream help you reach your goal for today? Do you feel a little bit better about how you can use argumentative structures, and in particular, how you can use that argument on each individual FRQ? All right, here we are. As we move forward, we're going to keep looking at this in the coming weeks. We're going to move into multiple choice, and then we'll focus on each FRQ independently for the last 3 before that 5-hour cram. If you have more questions, please feel free to reach out to us. We are here for you. Bless you, my child. Have a wonderful day. Keep safe in all this wacky weather we've been having, and I look forward to seeing you soon. Bye, friends.